Comrades by Nadine Gordimer. As Mrs. Hattie Telford pressed the electric gadget that deactivates the alarm device in her car, a group of youngsters came up behind her. Black. But no need to be afraid, this was not a city street. This was a non-racial enclave of learning, a place where tended flower beds and trees bearing botanical identification plates civilized the wild reminder of campus guards and dogs. The youngsters, like her, were part of the crowd loosening into dispersion after a university conference on people's education. They were the people to be educated. She was one of the committee of white and black activists, convenient generic for revolutions, leftist, secular, and Christian, fellow travelers and liberals, up on the platform. Comrade. She was settling in the driver's seat when one so slightly and slim he seemed a figure in profile came up to her window. He drew courage from the friendly lift of the woman's eyebrows above blue eyes, the tilt of her freckled white face. Comrade, are you going to town? No, she was going in the opposite direction. Home. But quickly, in the spirit of the hall where these young people had been somewhere, somewhat how present with her, no, she was with them. Stamping and singing freedom songs, she would take them at the to the bus station to their spokesperson named. Climb aboard. The others got in the back, the spokesman beside her. She saw the nervous white of his eyes as he glanced at and away from her. She searched for talk to set them at ease. Questions, of course. Older people always start with questioning young ones. Did they come from Soweto? They came from Harrismith, being on location. She made the calculation, about 200 kilometers distant. How'd they get here? Who told them about the conference? We are the youth conference in Fanning. A delegation. They had come by bus, one of the groups and stragglers who had kept arriving long after the conference had started. They had missed, then, the free lunch? At the back, no one seemed to be even breathing. The spokesman must have had some silent communication with them, some obligation to speak for them created by the journey or by other shared experience in the mysterious bonds of the young. These young. We are hungry. And from the back seat was drawn an assent like the suction of air compressing silence. She was silent in response, for the beat of a breath or two. These large gatherings both excited and left her overexposed, open and vulnerable to the rub and twitch of the mass shuffling across rows of seats and loping of the aisles. Babies' fudge-brown soft legs waving as their napkins are changed on their mothers' laps. Little girls with plaited loops on their heads listening like old crones. Heavy women swaying to chants. Men with fierce, unreadably black faces breaking into harmony tender and deep as they sing to God for his protection of Umkoto Wiswizi, as people on both sides always have. Everywhere, claimed divine protection for their soldiers, their wars. At the end of the day like this, she wanted a drink. She wanted the depraved luxury of solitude and quiet in which she would be restored, enriched, oh yes, by the day, to the familiar limits of her own being. Hungry, not for iced whiskey and feed up. It seemed she had scarcely hesitated. Look, I live nearby. Come back to my house and have something to eat. Then I'll run you to town. That would be very nice. We can be glad for that. And at the back, the tight vacuum relaxed. They followed her in through the gate, shrinking away from the dog. She assured them he was harmless, but he was large, with a fancy collar by which she held him. She trooped them in through the kitchen, because that was the way she always entered her house, something she would not have done if they had been adult, her black friends whose sophistication might lead them to believe the choice of entrance was unthinking historical sight. As she was going to feed them, she took them not into her living room with sofas and flowers, but into her dining room so that they could sit at the table right away. It was a room in confident taste that could be afforded to be spare. Bare floorboards, matching gold and wooden ceiling, antique brass chandelier, reed blinds instead of stuffy curtains. An African wooden sculpture represented a lion marvelously released from its matrix in the grain of a muko tree trunk. She pulled up the chairs and left the four young men, while she went back to the kitchen to make coffee and see what was in the refrigerator for sandwiches. They had greeted the maid in the language she and they shared on their way through the kitchen, but when the maid and the lady of the house had finished preparing cold meat and bread and the coffee was ready, she suddenly did not want them to see that the maid waited on her. She herself carried the heavy tray into the dining room. They're sitting around the table, silent, and there's no impression that they stopped an undertone exchange when they heard her approaching. She doles out plates, cups. They stare at the food, but their eyes seem focused on something she can't see, something that overwhelms. She urges them, just cold meat, I'm afraid, but there's chutney if you like it. Milk, everybody? Is the coffee too strong? I have a heavy hand, I know. Would anyone like some hot water? They eat. When she tries to talk to one of the others, he says, "Excuse?" and she realizes he doesn't understand English. Of the white man's language, knows perhaps only a little of that the Afrikaners in the rural town he comes from. Another gives his name, as if in some delicate acknowledgement of the food. "I'm Shadrach Nsusha." She repeats the surname to get it right. But he does not speak again. There's an urgent exchange of eye language, and the spokesman holds out the emptied sugar bowl to her. "Please." She hurries to the kitchen and brings it back refilled. They need carbohydrate. They are hungry. They're young. They need it. They burn it up. She's distressed at the inadequacy of the meal, and then noticed the fruit bowl, her big copper fruit bowl filled with apples and bananas, and perhaps there's a peach or two under the grape leaves with which she likes to complete an edible still life. "Have some fruit. Help yourselves." They're stacking their plates and cups, not knowing what they're expected to do with them in this room, which is a room where apparently people only eat, do not cook, do not sleep. When they finished the bananas and apples, Shadrach Nusha has a single peach and quickly got there first. She talks to the spokesman whose name she has asked for. "Dumal, are you in school, Dumal?" Of course he's not at school. They are not at school. Youngsters their age have not been schooled for several years. They are the children growing into young men and women for whom the school is a battleground, a place of boycotts and demonstrations, of literacy, of political rhetoric, the education of revolt against having to live the life their parents live. They have pompous titles of responsibility beyond childhood. He's a chairman of his branch of the Youth Congress. He was expelled 2 years ago for leading a boycott, throwing stones at the police, maybe burning the school down. He calls it all, quietly, abstractly, doesn't know many ordinary concrete words, but knows these euphemisms. Political activity. No school for 2 years? No. So what have you been able to do with yourself all that time? She isn't giving him a chance to eat his apple. He swallows a large bite, shaking his head on its thin little boy neck. "I was inside, detained from this June for 6 months." She looks round the others. "And you?" Shadrach seems to nod slightly. The other two look at her. She should know. She should have known. It's a common enough answer from youth like them, their color. They're not going to be saying they've been selected for the first 11 at cricket, or that they're off on a school tour to Europe in the school holidays. The spokesman, Dumal, tells her he wants to study by correspondence, get his matric that he was preparing for 2 years ago. 2 years ago, when he was still a child, when he didn't have the hair that is now appearing on his face, making him a man, taking away the childhood. In the hesitations, the silences of the table, where there is nervously spilt coffee among the plates of banana skins, there grows the certainty that he will never get the papers filled for the correspondence college. He will never get the 2 years back. She looks at them all and cannot believe what she knows, that they, suddenly, here in her house, will carry the AK-47s they only sing about now, miming death as they sing. They will have a career of wiring explosives to the undersides of vehicles. They will go away and come back through the bush to dig holes, not to plant trees to shade home, but to plant landmines. She can see they've been terribly harmed, but cannot believe they could harm. They're wiping their fruit-sticky hands furtively palm against palm. She breaks the silence, says something, anything. "How'd you like my lion? Isn't he beautiful? He's made by a Zimbabwean artist. I think the name's Dube." But the foolish interruption becomes a revelation. Demille, in his gaze, distant, lingering, speechless this time, reveals what has overwhelmed them. In this room, the space, the expensive antique chandelier, the consciously simple choice of reed blinds, the carved lion, all are the same level of impact, phenomena undifferentiated, undecipherable. Only the food that fed their hunger was real.